All right, so we're going to talk about Turn Assistant. And Brent alluded to this option a little earlier on. So it is packaged. So it's an optional feature, and it's packaged together with the TI Auto Unlock it's called the TI Headland. Package is called TI Headland. So basically what Turn Assistant does is it turns on the headlands for you, so you don't have to do it. And obviously there's a couple prerequisites for Turn Assistant to work properly. And one would be you need to have a field loaded with a boundary. Turn Assistant works based on the boundaries of the field. So you'll have to use boundaries in order to be able to utilize Turn Assistant. And also accuracy, as Brent mentioned with TI Auto, higher accuracy is better for Turn Assistant. There's no limitations to using it with WAS. You can do it, but if the boundaries shift, you could potentially run into some issues. So TerraStar L or RangePoint RTX or higher would certainly be better if you're doing Turn Assistant. So I'll just show you before I show you how to set it up. I'm just going to show you how it actually works. We'll just do one run here so you can see what it does. So I've already set this up in my terminal. I have a field loaded, I have a wayline loaded, and again, it's a pretty small field, so it's a little hard to simulate it properly, but this gives us an idea at least. So all I need to do is engage on the guidance line, and you can see on the screen it shows the upcoming turn. So as I approach the headland, the turn happens automatically. So I'm not touching the steering wheel. It's happening myself. Getting straightened out again here, and my other headland is approaching. Does the same thing. So it makes the headlands be consistent. There's lots of use cases where you would enjoy this function. Planting, mowing, anytime where you're doing a lot of headland turning, and when you want those headlands to be somewhat consistent is nice. If you're an owner operator and you're running a tractor as well as maybe planning the next day's work and the next week's work, this just saves up both maybe your brain power and your hands to do some work on your phone or your iPad or whatever you've got with you in the cab. So how to set this up? So most of the setup happens from the auto steer or from the map page. We enter the settings menu here, and at the top here we have a Turn Assistant tab. So this tab will not be here if you don't have the Turn Assistant unlock. So the first thing you've got to do if you're setting up Turn Assistant is have your implement set up properly. And there's a shortcut here within the Turn Assistant menu to access the implement manager. So you can tap on that here. You could also pick an implement here. I have the Turn Assistant disk loaded here. So I'm just going to go ahead and go to the settings for that implement. Then we have all the normal settings, our width and the distance to the working point, whether it's 2-point or a trailed implement. Those things all need to be entered properly, obviously, so that Turn Assistant will function correctly. But there is some extra settings for Turn Assistant. So we've got this button down here that says Turn. If you tap that, it brings up a couple extra things. One of those is a distance from the pivot point, so the draw pin or the hitch arms, to the very back of the implement. And we also have an overall width here. So this is the working width, this is the overall width. And the reason those are important is because Turn Assistant is working with your working with your boundary. And if the actual implement is a little wider than the working width, it's got to be entered so you don't wrap your corn planter around a tree or a fence post or something like that. So it is important that these values are entered properly. I have some of these set to 0 feet just so it keeps my implement compact because I've got a small field. So in real life, you'd probably have greater values in there. And then the other two boxes that show up are these two here, and they are our minimum turning radius when we turn right and our minimum turning radius when we turn left. And you can manually enter values here. Just tap on the box and input a value. Probably the best way to calculate this initially, if you don't know how short you can turn, is to simply do a turn. And every implement is different. So say you have your corn planter hooked up, you'd have a big open space, and you turn, and gradually turn shorter and shorter, and just figure out how tight you can turn safely without getting your tire in the tongue or whatever the obstruction is. And then while the steering wheel is turned, as you're doing the turn, you can hit this record minimum left. As you're turning left, you would tap this button, and you can see it auto-populated that to 15 feet, 11.5 inches. And you could do the same for, sorry, that was right, for turning left, turn the wheel the other way and do a radius the other way, and record the minimum turning radius. Probably it's going to be the same going both directions. But if not, you can have a different value either way. Okay, so that's implement setup. That is probably the first thing you want to do, and it is important to have your implement set up. Once you have an implement set up, those settings will stay there. That is part of this implement in Fendt Guide. So whenever you load this implement, these settings are going to be here. You don't have to do this every time. It's basically a one-time thing. So back out of here and back to the Turn Assistant menu. The next thing I would do is set up the headlands, and Brent showed us how to do that. I'll maybe just review that a little bit. That's actually in the next tab over here in the headland tab. If we wanted the same width headland all around the field, you could enter that right here in either feet or in either distance or amount of passes, headland passes. In this case, I want to do headland segments. So I would come in here, and I've already got this set up. Brent explained this as well. One thing to take note of if you're doing headland segments, as I am here, it's very important to have a square field. So when you're recording your boundary, pause the boundary as you're coming to the corner and just back into the corner to get it square. Otherwise, when you do these headland segments, you end up with some really funny connection points if those corners are rounded. So make sure you have square corners, and you can set up in a square field probably 4 segments. This doesn't have to be done, but in this case, I wanted to be able to have my field or my working area be a little wider, so I put in a 40-foot headland. That's where you go to do it. Back to the Turn Assistant menu. So we entered our minimum turning radius for our implement. Now here we have a couple extra settings. So this value here is the turning radius for the turn. And obviously this value can't be less than the minimum turning radius. So there's a minimum value there. But again, you can just tap on here and enter a value. Depends a little on how big your headland is, maybe as to how wide your implement is, as to what value you want in there. And some of those things kind of learn by trial and error once you figure out what works. The other number here, so we have So the dark blue line is our boundary, and the light blue line is our headland. And here you just simply need to, you're telling the system when to start turning. So we have our headland. So when the tractor crosses the headland, how far past the headland until the turn starts, or how far ahead of the headland do you want the turn to start? So typically you'd want to be past the headland a little ways until all your sections are shut off on the planter or whatever, your cultivators over the headland, and then you put in a positive number. Here I don't have much room, so I put in -20 so that my turn starts 20 feet before I get to the headland. Back on the left side here, so we have our turn assistant pattern settings. So there's several different pattern types here. So U-turn mode is probably the most common. With U-turn, turns on the headland simply the way you would if you're doing every pass. Get to headland, it does a light bulb turn and comes down right beside your previous pass. Or you could go every other if you'd want. There's the option to do that. Part field mode will work the field in smaller sections. It'll do groups of waylines, so it saves you turning as tight on the headland. Come up to the headland, it'll skip a few, come back down again, and work the field in a pattern. So it's yeah, you don't have to turn as short on the headland, and maybe you don't need as wide headlands in order to make the turn. So I can't show this one because my field is too small. So we'll go with the U-turn. The K-turn and the Y-turn are both for fully mounted 3-point hitch implements only. And they can be used with very small or very narrow headlands. You can see by the symbol, you come into the headland and you actually back up and go forward again. And all you got to do is change directions, and the turn assistant will do all the turning for you. Probably less use cases for those two types around here as well. In Europe, they have a lot of 3-point mounted implements, and they have a lot of small fields in some of the European countries. So those types of turns are probably more common over there. So I'm going to select the U-turn pattern, and then we can select which wayline we want to start at. So when you record your wayline the first time, your first AB line, then that will be wayline 0. And if you recorded that on the left side of the field, and that's where you want to start, then you would start at wayline 0. If you're doing U-turn and you're doing every other pass, it is really very critical what that is set to. The pass width is how many waylines are skipped. So pass width of 1 will take every wayline, and it'll do a pattern all the way across the field. If you want to skip waylines and just do every other, you could put in 2, and it'll take you all the way across the field. Skipping one pass, you could do another pattern coming back the other way. This button here basically changes which side of the field you want to start on. You can see the pattern sequence changes here. So it's just going to depend where you recorded your first wayline and which direction you want to work your field. If I have this set to the right arrow, starts with wayline 0, and it works 1, 2, 3, 4 in that direction. If I go the other way, then it will start on the other side of the field with my pattern and work down towards 0. So it just depends on how your waylines are set up within your field. So here we have, up here we entered the turning radius. Here we have a setting that kind of affects the shape of our turn, or the depth of our turn. So, and you can see this optimal turn speed change here. So if this is slid all the way to the left, When you come to the headland or when you exit the headland, it's going to do a pretty sharp turn to the left to try and keep that turn as shallow as possible. Sliding this further to the right will make that turn be deeper and it won't be quite as sharp. So it depends a little how much headland room you have as to where that needs to be set. I would say higher is probably better in most cases. You can see that the optimal turn speed significantly decreases as this is lowered. So probably in the middle is probably fine most of the time, or even higher if you've got lots of room. It just lets you do that turn a little quicker. Again, I don't have much room, so I got to leave this all the way to the left so that I can squeeze my turn into the small headland. And we'll talk about these settings later. We've got this headland turn alarm, and I would suggest having that turned on. So sometimes you calculate, actually we'll talk about that later, it'll make more sense later. So now we entered all those settings. So you've got this calculate button with the arrow, circular arrow. Tapping that one will basically take all those settings and it'll calculate the turns for the entire field. And you can see here, it's showing the amount of turns that can be completed is 39. There's 16 turns that can't be completed. And this button here with the magnifying glass just takes us to an overview of the entire field, shows all the turns, and any of the turns that are black cannot be completed. The orange or the yellow turns are fine. So you can zoom in if you want to see what's going on. It's pretty obvious in this case. Some of these turns at the edges can't be completed because I'd be running outside the boundary, so that doesn't work. Sometimes you have a funny kink in the headland because of a tree or something like that. There might be a turn or two in the middle somewhere that can't be done, and you'll just have to turn manually on those. And that's where this headland turn alarm is important. If this is turned on, it's gonna throw an alarm when you're on a way line with a turn that can't be completed automatically. It'll just throw an alarm and just to alert you that you've got to do it manually. Save you running into the tree at the end, hopefully. Okay, so we calculated our turns. I'm fine with the 39 turns, the 16 at the end that can't be done. That's okay in this case. So then let's go back to our map page here. And I'll maybe just zoom this in a little bit. So I've got a really narrow implement on again, just to try and conserve some space. So we've got this turn button on the left-hand side. One last step to basically load this to activate this entire turn sequence is hitting this auto button, and now we're good to go. So I'm just going to find a pass here, and let's do another turn. So yeah, basically all you have to do is hit the auto steer engage button once, and now you're steering on the line. The next turn always shows up here, shows which direction it's turning. Down at the bottom here, this value is the distance to the headland, so the distance to the dark blue line. This number here is the distance to the turn, which is obviously less because the turn starts somewhere here. And as we approach that headland, you can see it lowering. You can also see this tractor icon. When that symbol is green, it means that your speed is fine. If it's red, it means that you're technically going too fast to do that turn. And that's based on that optimal turn speed. So technically I should really be slowing down a bit there. That's fine. That's pretty slow. So it obviously overestimates a little bit, but I've got a tight turn, so works better to do it at a slower speed. So then as soon as you get straightened out, shows up the turn on the next headland, which in this case is pretty much instantly. And that works all the way across the field. You don't have to touch the steering wheel, unless of course there's a turn or two that need to be done manually. And where this really gets to be useful is if you have the turn assistant unlock, you'll also have the TI headland, or you'll also have the TI auto unlock, which Brent showed us in the last session. So you can really pretty much automate everything. You don't have to touch any buttons to lift or lower implements if you set up TI auto and turn assistant. And I know some of you like still moving your arms a little bit, and it can be times when that's nice, but there are also use cases where you want things to be consistent, or you've got other things on your mind where you can save yourself time and headaches by having this stuff all happen automatically. A couple more things in here. So back to the turn assistant menu. So I mentioned these pro headland settings, and I'll just go there. So by default, the system will keep you within the boundary, right? It's never going to let the implement go outside the boundary. Sometimes on one side of the field, you might have maybe there's a hay field, or maybe there's a field lane or something like that, and you're actually okay. You'd like a little more space on that headland to turn, and you're okay if the tractor goes out on the field lane. Well, that's what you can do in here. You can pick a segment. Let's say on segment 3, I have a field lane that's 10 feet wide. I can just enter that value here, 10 feet, and you can see another line show up here. So we're extending the boundary another 10 feet. You kind of see that on this image here. It'll allow the tractor to actually go outside the boundary to make the turn. And you could do that for any one or all of the segments. And then this button is what actually turns on those headland settings. So nothing happens with those boundary extensions unless I push this. So it's just a toggle to turn it on and off. You also see this manual button here. Let me go to the map screen to show that. You can also manually initiate a turn. If you turn this manual turn on, it saves some of the setup. In the turn assistant menu here, you would still need to set your radius for the turn, and you need to set how many passes you want to skip. But then, and I'm not really sure why you would use this if you can set it up to turn automatically. But now you select which way you want your first turn to be, and if you're engaged on a line, it always puts a turn right in front of you. Whenever you want to turn, you just tap this button. So it disregards headlands or anything. I guess you could use this manual mode if you wanted to turn on the headland, but you didn't have a boundary, or you didn't feel like setting a boundary up. You could use it this way, and you can integrate this into a headland management sequence, into a teach-in sequence as well. So you can kind of semi-automate it as well. I mentioned some of these other turn types. Let me show that briefly. Heart field mode, can't really show. I could show the K turn. I calculate and show what that looks like. So you can see that. I don't think I'll bother running through the cycle, but as we come up to the headland, drive over here, back up, and the turning all happens automatically. All I go to do is change direction. So if you have a mounted implement, you could try either this K turn or the Y turn type. So that's pretty much all I have on Turn Assistant. Be curious if there's any feedback, any questions.
Do any of you have questions? I know some of this stuff is fairly technical, and if you never use it, it is a little bit intimidating. But we do have guys that get onto it. How many of you guys use it? The auto headland turn. How many of you use it? All right, so we have a couple. Anybody want to talk about what you use it for? Randall, I know you have it. Do you want to tell them what you use it for and how it works?
Yeah, we use it for planting corn. Works pretty good. Sucks when you're combining because you don't know where your planter passes were, but other than that, it's pretty nice. Makes a lot less on your mind. You can worry about other tasks.
Thank you. Anybody else? You want it, Robert?
Just one little tip on the the auto portion of Turn Assistant. When you're, what Ryan talked about with the start at wayline, you mentioned this 0 is the first wayline you created. Well, if you're in this menu and you don't exactly know where you are, maybe you're on number 3, maybe you're on number 6, you're not sure which one, maybe you come back from filling up the fertilizer and you come back and you want to start here and just finish the field to your right or left. What's nice to note is that what I recommend is that when you get ready to use auto, which is basically start from one end of the field and work to the other, that you line up on the line that you're ready to start on with your machine physically, then go into this. And so say I'm lined up, I want to start here. Then you go into that menu we were just in, Brian, and click the start at wayline. When you click the start at wayline, you see what populated there, -29. That's the line you're on. So it will always populate to the line that you're physically sitting on. So that's why I recommend when you get lined up and you're ready to go right or left across the field, go into here, click the start on, it will populate the line you're on, you hit the green check mark, and then you will have to recalculate your, hit the recalculator button, and then you're ready to start the pattern across the field. So just noting that it will populate the line that you're on.